Hello, and welcome to Wallace's Mysteries of Antiquity. Subscribe to this series to explore the enigmas of our distant ancestors and try to come to tentative conclusions about them. In this video, we will be exploring the accounts regarding the digging of the Robbers' Tunnel in the Great Pyramid. Below the true entrance of the Great Pyramid, there is a rough-cut tunnel. This tunnel is used today as the entrance for tourists as it's fairly roomy and flat compared to the claustrophobic downward passage. This was actually meant to be a passing section of a larger video, but chasing sources sent me down a wild rabbit hole of he said, she said, and vague hints of facts, and I wanted you to join me on this exploration. First, allow me to describe it. It is 27 meters long and connects the outer edge of the pyramid directly to the junction between the upper and lower passages. About halfway through, the tunnel takes a subtle left bend. The blocks are said to be mortared together here, but what you'd see today if you visit is modern 20th century concrete. The tunnel is fairly roomy today, wide enough for tourists to simultaneously enter and exit the structure, and although a lot of this work is modern, it appears that immediately after its excavation it became the de facto entrance and was quickly expanded. The following is a quote from a work dated 1201 AD. I apologize to any Arabic speakers for the pronunciations you're about to hear. I tried my best. Quote, "He that enters the pyramid continues in it for about 20 drahs, in some places in an upright, in others in a bent posture. Daylight shines upon him until he turns walking upright to his left hand, where he finds a sloping alley, which he ascends to the distance of a man's length without meeting any level step. Below this alley is a pit, said to be a well, formed here, the opening of which admits a feeble light. A slender person only can enter into it. The learned Noor ad-Din al-Tabari has informed me that he crept into it upon his stomach to the distance of less than a man's length, and then walked in it upright upon his legs about 20 drahs. After which he reached the exterior of the pyramid, at a place elevated above the breach practiced on the north side, right in front of him who enters." End quote. Based on this account, we seem to get an idea why the Robbers' Tunnel became the main entrance point. The Robbers' Tunnel itself, in the 1200s, was already tall enough to stand in some parts, but the hole between the upper and lower sections, which is now a grand staircase, was barely large enough for a thin man to squeeze through. Since the upper sections were what everyone comes to see, the lower tunnel was hardly used and ended up filled with debris. It is interesting that it was already so large, because looters tend not to make tunnels any larger than what's necessary. So what's going on here? First, let me recount to you what is accepted as most likely by academics, though I should point out that even they take the story with a grain of salt. In 832 AD, Arab warrior Caliph Al-Ma'mun brought an army to Egypt to put an end to the Bashmirian revolts, which at that point had been on and off for 60 years. It didn't take long, and he had time to explore a bit. He heard stories of great treasures inside, failed to find the true entrance, chose a random location, and started digging. About halfway through, their work disturbed a great stone covering the granite plugs, causing them to pivot left and ran into the granite plugs by luck. Upon entering the upper chambers for the first time since antiquity, we found the pyramid as it is today, completely empty. That's the story, but is there any evidence for such an event actually happening? Well, everything up to Al-Ma'mun approaching the pyramid can be confirmed. This war really did happen, the rebellion really did last 2 years, and to crush it once and for all, he really did bring an army to Egypt. He was in Egypt for 47 days in total, which is not a lot of time to quash a rebellion and dig a tunnel. We have contemporary documents for all of this. It's once he reaches Giza where things start to fall apart. I have found a single contemporary account of Al-Ma'mun in Egypt, called Deze of Telmar, which was written by Dionysius Telmaharayo, who accompanied him as sort of a religious ambassador. What did he say about the pyramids? Nothing. There is absolutely no reference to the pyramids in the only account I could find of this military campaign. So where does the story in modern Egyptology come from? I was able to find this particular story, sort of, but it wasn't written in the time of Al-Ma'mun. It was 4 centuries later by Muslim scholar Al-Makurzal. Quote, The pyramids attracted the attention of Caliph Al-Ma'mun, who decided to demolish one to find out what was inside. Told this was impossible, he insisted on breaking into a pyramid, evidently Cheops. So a fire was lit and vinegar was sprayed, and crowbars were applied, and blacksmiths set to work, and the fissure was created that remains open to this day. End quote. This is exactly the story we've heard. So far, so good. Let's read some more of Al-Ma'mun. Quote, "In were passages going down and others going up, all of them frightening and difficult to move through. At the top was a square chamber some 8 cubits on each side. In the middle was a closed marble basin. When the cover was removed, it was found to contain nothing but decayed items. Al-Ma'mun then put a stop to further excavations." End quote. Sounds good, right? It looks like we found the account that became the modern story. There are 2 problems. The first, obviously, is that it was written 400 years after the actual event. The second problem is that I misled you. I read 2 paragraphs and paused to insert a thought in between them. I did this to make it sound like one paragraph followed the other in Al-Ma'mun's writing, but they don't. The first paragraph I read was the first half of one account, and the second was the last half of a completely separate account. The first account I ended with, quote, "Blacksmiths set to work and the fissure was created that remains open to this day," end quote. This is not the entire account, so let's continue with this one. Quote, "After breaking through the wall, the workers stumbled across a precious vessel whose market value turned out to be exactly the amount spent on the excavation up to that point. Apparently, the pyramid builders had planted the vessel as an incentive to stop the demolition. Realizing that he could never prevail against a civilization capable of such accurate predictions, the Caliph stopped work at the pyramids." End quote. So, in the account that specifies vinegar and fire, the Caliph never even makes it inside. He seems to bust into a small chamber containing something valuable. So, should we ignore this account because we know of no such chamber? No, let's put a pin in it for now. Al-Ma'mun, the man who just gave us 2 conflicting accounts, seemed to have been simply compiling known accounts, and not really indicating which one he believed. And he's about to make things even more confusing because he has yet another account of Al-Ma'mun. In this account, he gets inside the same way as before, but he does not find it empty. In this account, in the king's chamber, they found the image of a man in a green stone. When opened, they found a figure wearing golden armor adorned with jewels, one emerald so large that it was compared to the size of a chicken egg. Should we ignore this account since it seems most fanciful? No, let's put a pin in it too. The Islamic scholar provides 3 accounts for the digging of the tunnel, but he was obviously copying from earlier works that seem lost to time. Let's number our possibilities. 1. Al-Ma'mun breaches the tunnel and finds it empty. 2. Al-Ma'mun only dug a few meters, may have found something, and left, never even getting inside. And 3. Al-Ma'mun breached the pyramid and found treasures inside. What we really need is a more contemporary source to maybe give us some insight into which account is most likely. Luckily, such an account does exist, from an Arab historian born only 60 years after Al-Ma'mun was in Egypt. Al-Masudi's account starts recounting the Coptic theory of the creation of the pyramids. This is exactly how possibility number 1 starts. He then specifically mentions fire, vinegar, and iron tools. Again, this is a much older account, appears to be telling us that the first account is most likely. Let's continue and make sure. Quote, "After much effort, he penetrated to a distance of 20 cubits inside the pyramid, and there was overjoyed to find a treasure that consisted of thousands dinars of pure gold. But then the Caliph had reckoned up the cost of the operation, and he discovered it was exactly equal to the value of the treasure." End quote. If you're wondering, 20 cubits is only about half the length of the tunnel. That took a turn I'll bet most of you weren't expecting. It suddenly jumped from possibility 1 to possibility number 2, one we nearly dismissed. If you did see that coming, I congratulate you, but you're definitely not going to see the twist ending. The story continues with the Caliph leaving Egypt satisfied with the treasure that he found, and that decades later his son, Al-Ma'mun, returned to finish the tunnel and found the pyramid empty. You heard that right. This account is not even of Al-Ma'mun, but his father, Caliph Harun al-Rashid. So now we have a fourth account, one where Al-Ma'mun's father dug most of the tunnel, found a stash of gold and left, and Al-Ma'mun merely finished the tunnel and found the pyramid empty. So what really happened in the early 800s? Let's pick through the accounts and see if we can make anything out. Let's discuss the most outlandish version first, the one of the green man, inside which there is a body wearing gold armor inside the king's chamber with an emerald the size of an egg. While at first it seems very easy to discount, the description does appear to be describing something the Arabs shouldn't have been able to describe. Do you suppose it's possible to a 9th century Arab explorer without any proper knowledge of mummies might call this a green man of stone and this a gold suit of armor? We now know that the mummy went inside the mummy board, which went inside the green wooden coffer, which went inside a sarcophagus. Al-Masudi couldn't have known this, which suddenly makes his description far harder to dismiss. These wouldn't have been Khufu's original burial goods, rather a later dynasty's restoration, like the Sate period sarcophagus and mummy board that was found inside Menkauri's pyramid. We have two accounts where the pyramid wasn't breached at all, but only partially. One says it was Al-Ma'mun, the other says it was his father, but they do agree on the substance that after about 20 cubits, which is less than halfway through the tunnel, they found gold of some sort and stopped. Is it possible? There is no known room here, but could there have been a small chamber once in this spot? Extremely unlikely. While I'm sure there are small voids throughout the pyramid, I'm also quite sure they don't contain gold. So what else could this cavity halfway through the tunnel have been? Perhaps Al-Ma'mun didn't really start a new tunnel. Perhaps, as many others have considered, he simply unplugged an existing one. The direct path of the tunnel, the amount of the work that would have gone into it, the short time he was in Egypt, the fact that it's conveniently the only way to get something large in or out, all point to the idea that whoever cut the tunnel was not digging blindly and made the luckiest guess of all time. So in order to find out how old the tunnel is, we need to figure out how long it could have been plugged for. Roman scholar Pliny the Elder said that when he saw them, the casings were perfect. So is there anything of note that happened between Pliny and Al-Ma'mun 7 centuries later that could have removed the casing stones and allowed access to the masonry? Well, yes. I actually have an exact date and time in mind, and it was during the life of Pliny, sort of. Pliny comes up in discussions of Egypt from time to time because he's one of the earliest to have documented the pyramids, but he's a fascinating man on his own right. August 24th, 79 AD, about 1 in the afternoon. On that day, Pliny was in command of the Roman fleet at Mycenium, when he would have felt the ground start to rumble. Rushing to the water, he likely gazed across the Gulf of Nepal in horror at the black column rising 20 miles in the air. Mount Vesuvius had just exploded and will, in the next few hours, unleash the energy of 100,000 atomic bombs, spewing over 1 million tons of materials a second into the stratosphere. Like the hero that he was, he commanded what remained of his fleet to charge across the Gulf to rescue as many people as they could as the angry volcano bombarded them with stones of molten lava weighing tens of thousands of pounds and annihilated everything they landed on. Pliny the Elder made it to shore just as the pyroclastic cloud obliterated him and his fleet. While Pliny was valiantly charging towards the disaster, the shockwaves in the ground from the initial explosion would reach Egypt. This could have shaken loose the first bit of casing and revealed the plugged tunnel waiting for someone to look closely and notice it. It was not repaired as by this time Egypt was ruled by Rome, and while technically pharaohs, they did not continue Egyptian traditions and spent very little time in Egypt. There could have been a tunnel under the casing stones for the entirety of Greek and Roman history. This makes it even older than that, so how old? It's often suggested that the pyramids were looted as soon as the central government first collapsed. However, there is plenty of evidence that certain cults continue to exist, and it's not like the intermediate periods were anarchy. They were more like civil war. If a cult existed at the pyramids, they still had the ability to call up the military power to defend them, as well as the religious and cultural impact that these fairly fresh monuments had. I think it's safe to say that it's unlikely for such destructive looting to have happened during this time. I suggest we look at a modern tomb. The USSR has not existed for 3 decades, but its founder, Vladimir Lenin, is still safely inside of his tomb with armed Russians defending him. I feel like this is the most likely state that Khufu's pyramid would have been in during the First Intermediate Period. Besides, we have a poem called Ipu Wer, which is believed to have come from the Second Intermediate Period, where it says, quote, "All is in ruin. A man kills his brother. Blood is everywhere. A few laws of the judgment hall are cast forth. Officials are slain and the records are taken away. The secrets of the kings of Upper and Lower Egypt are divulged. What the pyramids concealed has become empty and the palace is destroyed." End quote. This destruction sounds a lot more like what we're looking for. This was almost certainly, in my opinion, the time that upper sections were first breached. But there's a problem. Looting the pyramid, for all but the largest items, can be done without the robber's tunnel. I don't believe the well shaft was ever closed. The Old Kingdom believed the cult's presence and the 160-foot vertical climb in pitch blackness was impossible. But once one person made it up, a rope could be set fairly easily. Once you have a few men up, then you can then dig down to bypass the granite plugs, for as a rule you do not dig upwards unless you have to. The portcullis could then be bypassed to gain access and then smashed to get items out. Things like mummy boards wouldn't fit out, but robbers likely found the gold more valuable than the box and would have simply broken it like every other one we found. I know it is commonly believed that the looters dug the robber's tunnel from both ends at once to get treasures out. But other than the mummy itself, which held very little value, what would be so large? Perhaps a Ka statue from the Queen's niche, but for an ancient black market dealer with no way to verify where it came from, would a statue from the pyramid really be any more valuable than any other? With the exceptions of the gems and gold, of course, but those could be pried off without removing the statue. Furthermore, there is no evidence that a statue ever stood here. So, while I must admit there's a possibility that robbers dug it to get something out, I still have lingering question of if there's someone else who could have carved this tunnel. What if we've been thinking about it completely wrong? What if it wasn't to get something out of the pyramid, but instead to get something into it? This is Menkare's pyramid. He was the grandson of Khufu who made the Great Pyramid. This was a sarcophagus that was in Menkare's burial chamber until Howard Weiss took it out. Menkare is an Old Kingdom pharaoh. This sarcophagus and the anthropoid coffin with it are New Kingdom. So what's happening here? The New Kingdom is known to have done extensive renovations to the pyramid. It is likely why the Greeks described them as spotless, as this is when they were fixed up. If the pyramid was recased in this era of history, then they could have covered up a tunnel if it was already there. In fact, to really renovate it, you'd want to put a fresh mummy board and sarcophagus inside, like they did with Menkare. Remember that green coffin and gold mummy board I showed earlier that the Arab scholar shouldn't have been able to describe? Those were both New Kingdom too, so now things are starting to line up. With the granite plugs in place, there would be no way to get a new coffer inside. You'd have to dig a straight path directly to the upper section to get it in. The granite box is too large to fit out the door, so replacing it was out of the question. So the only New Kingdom things you'd find after they resealed it would be the green man covering the gold man. It's an interesting theory, but do I have any evidence of New Kingdom resealing an old tunnel up like this? And even if I did, is it really possible for it to have remained unnoticed for 700 years? I'm going to give you one more story of another explorer. After searching for a way into the pyramid for 16 days of excavation, one of the explorer's workers noticed a chink between two of the stone blocks which form the side of the pyramid. Excavating around this area, he found that one of the blocks was actually loose. The men pried it out to reveal an aperture. They continued digging out this tunnel until they broke through into a part of the tunnel that had not been filled, but could go no further. Doesn't this sound familiar? Well, it is not an account of 832 AD, but almost 1,000 years later, on February 18, 1818. The explorer was Giovanni Belzoni, and it took place right next door at Khafre's pyramid. So yes, apparently a filled tunnel can exist in a major pyramid without being noticed for millennia. Okay, now I think we've finally found enough pieces to try to put all of this together. Here's a new hypothesis for the creation and history of the Robbers' Tunnel. In the Second Intermediate Period, the Great Pyramid was first looted from the well shaft and/or its connecting tunnel was dug. It's possible a one-man squeeze robber's tunnel was cut at this time to get something out, but it's also possible they simply smashed larger items. One of the New Kingdom pharaohs dug the robber's tunnel proper in order to facilitate the arrival of new burial paraphernalia. He then sealed the well shaft, connection between the upper and lower sections, and both ends of the tunnel. This left a small part of the tunnel in the middle open, and possibly something was left of minimal value there. The outer plugging was covered in fresh casing stones and forgotten about. Mount Vesuvius rattled the casing stones covering the blocked robber's tunnel, and may have also obscured the real entrance with rubble in 79 AD. Al-Ma'mun's father found the blocked robber's tunnel and began to cut it out of curiosity, becoming satisfied with whatever small item was found once the unplugged central section of the tunnel was breached. In 832, Al-Ma'mun followed his father's footsteps and finished opening the tunnel, finding the burial goods left by the New Kingdom. He removed everything of value to Baghdad, and everything that wasn't worth his time was removed over the later decades by looters. From there, history proceeds the way academia says it does. The tunnel was used as a primary entrance for several centuries until the connection hole was expanded and people began to use a lower one again. 19th and 20th century work expanded the tunnel even more and made it safe for tourists, once again reverting it to the de facto entrance. That's what I believe, at least a possible series of events that fit all of the evidence and accounts we have. Thank you for watching. Respectfully discuss my theories, or you post your own in the comments, and subscribe to Wallace's Mysteries of Antiquity to continue exploring our distant ancestors.